Hey there, I'm Connor, and something really creepy happened to me, so I'm going to tell you all about it. I have to warn you though, it's on the spooky side. So there's a chance it may freak you out so much you have to sleep with the lights on. There's also a chance you won't believe me, and that's up to you, but please remember that this is real for me. I believe in this stuff, and always have. In fact, I've been obsessed with the afterlife since I was little. I used to have open dreams, where strangers would come and try to connect with me. It was often ambiguous that I barely saw their faces. All I could remember after awakening was just a shadowy or indistinct shape with strange gestures, like a message. When I told my parents about them, my mom made it out that it was all nonsense, but my grandma assured me that there might be some spirits trying to tell me something. She told me not to worry, as most spirits had no intention of causing me harm. Sometimes these spirits would tell me things. Once, one appeared with a dog. Then a month later, my dad came home with a puppy. Then another time, I dreamt that Grandma had passed away. I didn't dare to tell anyone about that dream. I was so scared it would come true. Then, you guessed it, a few months later, she died. I came to dread those dreams, and worst of all, now I didn't have Grandma to confide in about them. To be fair, as I grew older, the dreams stopped, but my fascination with the afterlife didn't. I knew not to mess around with this kind of stuff, as doing so was bad news. Grandma had always told me that. But then I started dating Jennifer, and I really wanted to show her this side to the world. So I bought a Ouija board from Amazon. Well, it's a flat board with letters and numbers on it that's used as a gateway to the spirit world. I knew the rules. Never try this at home, as that was asking for trouble. The last thing I needed was to unleash a poltergeist or something worse in my house. Also, never ask the spirit to show themselves. So the plan was to sneak into the old house in my neighborhood that had just sold and was currently empty. I told Jennifer about my plan. She'd never done anything like this before, and although she was skeptical, she was also excited. That's what I love about her. She's so brave and adventurous. We met in the house's front yard at 3 a.m. as we planned, and both of us were seriously in the mood when we were trying to break into it. Yeah, I know, this sounds bad. But we didn't want to make a mess of the place or anything, we just wanted somewhere empty where we could test out the board. Firstly, we set the mood by lighting candles, incense, and burning sage. Before I started, I grabbed Jennifer's hand and said out loud, "Please don't show up, evil forces." Then I placed a silver coin on the board to deter bad spirits. Then we both placed our index fingers on the planchette, which is a movable pointer, and took a deep breath. I called out into the darkness, "Is anyone there? If spirits are living here, please talk to us." Nothing. Not even the slightest bit of wind. Jennifer laughed, and this annoyed me. I suppose she could tell from my face that I was mad. So she smiled at me and said, "I'm sorry, let's try again." Then placed her finger back. Then I said, "If there's anyone there, we would like to make contact." I was getting goosebumps right at that moment. And the wind started to pick up. The stillness broke, and the darkness around us seemed to move. Excited, I yelled out, "Is anyone there?" Then it got super crazy. Like it was this scene from a movie with dirt swirling around us. The planchette started moving slowly. Jennifer looked at me and said, "What are you doing?" "It's not me, I promise," I replied. I looked up at her, and the moment our eyes met, we knew the planchette was moving by itself. I continued asking, "How many spirits are there?" It took a minute of silence for the planchette to move to 1. It was becoming interesting. "Are you a good spirit?" It moved faster. Youguess. Okay, I considered it a yes, and continued questioning it on some simpler things. "Can I know your name?" The answer was Sameasher. At this point, I could hear Jennifer freak out. It was kind of creepy because I didn't call her name even once. I said, "If you're really here, prove it." Jennifer jumped up. "Hey, we promised not to ever ask it to prove its appearance." Suddenly, a gust of wind came out of nowhere and blew out one of the candles. Jennifer yelled at me to stop this now. Then she ran out of there. I quickly said to the spirit, "Nice to know you, but it's time for us to go. Goodbye." And at the same time swept the planchette over the goodbye symbol on the board to quit. Then I picked up the stuff and chased after Jennifer to check if she was okay. She was completely freaked out and told me she was never doing that again. The problem was, I couldn't stop thinking about the spirit. The new owners would soon move into the house, so I didn't have many opportunities left to go back there. So 1 week later, again at 3 a.m., I persuaded my daredevil friends Austin and Miguel to meet me there. I set the board up, and we began. I asked a few questions, and nothing happened at first. Then after a while, the board kept pointing out meaningless letters. I actually thought it was the others messing about. They soon got bored and all thought it was just my imagination all the time. Feeling annoyed, Austin left to go to the toilet, and Miguel and I carried on. I believed in my previous experience, so I persistently continued asking, "Do you know who's in the toilet now?" But still, the board only gave out random numbers. When Austin came back, Miguel gave Austin the numbers we'd recorded and said that this time it might not work and we should just go. The color drained from his face. It turns out the numbers were his own social security number. Austin began accusing this of being a setup. I told him it wasn't. I guess he was curious as he sat back down and joined in. And that's when Miguel asked a stupid question. "How much longer is this loser Connor kid alive?" I gave him a dirty look and said, "I told you not to joke around." Then the planchette started moving, stopping on the number 1, then 0. 10 years. I only have 10 years left. This was awful. I was too young to die in just 10 years' time. But no, the planchette continued to move. And to my horror, I watched it go between the letters D, A, Y, S. "Quit it, guys. This isn't funny," I shouted out to them. They stared back at me with a mixture of shock and fear. Okay, I was pretty sure they hadn't moved it. They urged me to end the game and go home, not forgetting to tell me to never play this game again. Easy for them to say. They're not the ones being told they will die in 10 days. I couldn't stop thinking about what happened. It was awful. I was so stressed out it took me ages to fall asleep. Then when I eventually did, I had an open dream. I dreamt of a spirit girl who was walking to school with me. Then suddenly she pushed me into traffic and a car was coming. I woke up in hot sweats. 3 days later, I sneaked to the house again by myself and asked only one question. "How much longer do I live?" And she answered, 7 DAYS. So it couldn't be a random answer. The spirit was counting down my remaining days on Earth. 3 days later, I still couldn't stop myself from going there and repeating the same question again, and the answer was 4. I couldn't just wait to die. I had to do something. So I told my parents about it, but they didn't believe me, and even scolded me for playing weird games so late at night. On the day my time was meant to be up, they saw the state I was in. I couldn't stop shaking and refused to get out of bed. There was no way I was going near a road today, so my mom rang the school and said I was sick. Then she stayed home from work and barely left my side. That day went so slowly, but nothing happened. It's a month later now and I'm still alive. I did end up grounded for 3 months for sneaking out at night and terrifying my parents. When my punishment's over, there's no way I'll be taking the Ouija board to any more empty houses. In fact, I've stuck it in the attic and that's where it's staying forever. So that's my story. You can decide for yourself if you're willing to try it or not. But my main advice to you is don't meddle with this stuff, as it's definitely not worth it. Hey, I'm Ryan, and I'm here to prove why it's impossible for guys and girls to just be friends. Yeah, I know it's the 21st century and all, but I only reached this conclusion through experience. My ex Carrie was friends with this super annoying guy called Chris. They'd known each other for years, but it was obvious he liked her. I saw how gooey-eyed he was around her. She was so insistent that there was nothing going on between them, but guess what? After we broke up, it didn't take long for them to go official on social media. After that, I started dating this awesome girl called Lily. I didn't even mind the fact that there were a few guys in her group, as I eventually befriended them all too. They're all nice, and especially this one guy, Todd, seems like a cool dude. We played basketball together and chatted about video games. Lily didn't like me talking to him, though. She said she found it weird that I was so friendly with him, and she'd rather I wasn't. Whatever, I just put this down to the fact that girls could be weird sometimes. Okay, so maybe Lily didn't seem to like Todd all that much. She never sat by him or really spoke to him. It was probably just some ridiculous girl drama thing. So I continued to chat with Todd as normal. He was a genuine guy who did nice things, such as when Lily got super drunk at some party. He was the one who called me up to come and get her. And then he stayed up with her until I arrived. I actually kind of felt sorry for Todd. as the rest of the group all had partners, so he was left being the gooseberry. Once, when me and Lily were feeding each other strawberries and being all lovey-dovey, I noticed how glum he looked. Suddenly, an idea popped into my head. I should help him find a girlfriend. So I have this one friend called Gemma. She's sweet and pretty, but she can be a little on the overbearing side. She's always sneaking candy bars in my backpack with sticky notes on them saying, "Enjoy, love, G, X." And she likes every single picture I post on social media pages. I've told her I'm not interested in her like that, as I'm with Lily, but she always just smiles and says, "I know that's silly." Anyway, Todd struck me as the kind of guy who may like a candy-giving, slightly clingy girl. So on a group outing to the cinema, I told him how I felt bad for him being the only single one in the group, and how I had this friend who'd be perfect for him. At first, he shook his head and said thanks but no thanks, as he wasn't looking for a girlfriend right now. I wasn't taking no for an answer. So the next week I bombarded him with messages all about how amazing Gemma was. In the end, he agreed to go on a date with her. And afterwards, he messaged me, thanking me for setting it up, and telling me how he'd had a great time. Result? Just call me Dr. Love, please. Oh, you're welcome. My relationship with Lily was going great. So when she said she was going away for the night with her friends, I told her this was cool, as I trusted her and I trusted them. Then at 3 a.m., when I was shooting zombies on my game, my phone buzzed. It was Todd. "We've been playing Truth or Dare. Sorry, but I think you need to hear this." This was followed by a voice message. My heart sank, as in a tipsy voice I heard Lily say, "Before loving Ryan, I actually had feelings for another guy, and I kinda still do now, The recording ended there. Not that it mattered, as I'd heard enough. My girlfriend liked someone else. Then Todd messaged me. "Sorry for that, bro. Thought you deserved the heads up." I thanked him for his honesty. I knew it must have been hard for him to call out Lily. As I saw it, he was a really good guy with the right intentions. For obvious reasons that night, I couldn't sleep at all. So the next morning, I got up early and went for a jog to try and clear my mind fog. That's when Gemma rang me up and asked me out on a picnic. I agreed. I figured that it'd beat moping around all miserable. By the time I arrived back from my jog, Gemma was already parked outside of my dorm, a smile on her face and a picnic basket in hand. I commented on how quick she'd packed it, and she blushed and mentioned something about female intuition. I stank, so I went and showered quickly. Then, as I was getting into Gemma's car, Lily messaged me, telling me she'd be back by noon and I should come over for lunch. But I'm not in any mood to deal with her just yet. So I messaged her saying I was busy with an assignment. The picnic was great. It was such a sunny day, and Gemma filled the basket with all of my favorite treats. I arrived back feeling positive about things. So what if Lily had a crush on another guy? It didn't mean she didn't love me, right? So I went over to Lily's place, but when she opened the door, she just scowled at me and said, "Oh, it's you." Of course it was me. Who else would it be? I followed her inside, but her mood only worsened. I tried asking her about her trip, but she answered with shrugs and eye rolls. Feeling annoyed, I asked her what her problem was. Then she just went into full rage mode and shouted at me. "What's my problem? Why don't we talk about you? Where have you been today? Don't think you can lie to me." Then she showed me on her phone, and on the screen was one of Gemma's posts about how she'd had a lovely picnic with me. "We're just friends, Lily, you know that. You spent all night with your guy friends, and I didn't moan about it." "Well, I know she likes you, and now you're just hanging out with her behind my back." Fueled by anger, I yelled at her. "So what? You're not really innocent either. I know you prefer some other guy over me." "Well, then I suggest you go and date him instead." "What? Whatever. You know what? Fine. Maybe I will." "Yeah, well, I think you should." I stormed out of there and charged up the street. By the time I arrived back at my dorm, the reality dawned on me that I'd just broken up with the love of my life. Jeez, this sucked. From then on, whenever I saw Lily around campus, she totally ignored me. It was the worst feeling ever. Todd messaged me a lot to check if I was okay. I kind of hoped he could help me get back with Lily, but I was getting some seriously weird vibes from him. Once he even sent a message saying, "You're an amazing guy, and you're way too good for Lily anyway." Okay, weird. Did he have a crush on me? That would explain why Lily was wary of me making friends with him. Worse still, I had Gemma hanging around me like some sort of limpet. Because I was lonely, I agreed to go for a coffee with her. She left her phone on the table when she went to the toilet. It beeped, so I looked at it. And that's when I saw that Todd had a picture of him holding Lily in her arms with the caption, "Hey, look, I've succeeded. You two quickly finish your quest, although maybe we should pass on the double date." As Gemma walked back over, I waved the picture in front of her and said, "I think you have some explaining to do." The color drained from her face, but she gave me a feeble nod. It turns out that on her date with Todd, they discussed how she was crazy about me and how he was into Lily. Then Todd had shown Gemma the messages I'd sent him, telling him how great she was and why I thought he should date her. So he made out I must secretly like her and suggested they come up with a plan to split us up. There I was, thinking Todd was my friend, but turns out the whole time he was an evil genius. Crying, Gemma played me the full voice message that Todd had sent her from that night. Before loving Ryan, I actually had feelings for another guy. And I still kinda do now, but it doesn't matter, as I've decided that Ryan's the guy for me. Besides, some of you have probably noticed that the other guy, well, it's Todd. We're just friends though, so let's leave it be. I told Gemma to stay away from me. Then I stormed out of there. She shouted after me, but I ignored her, and I've been ignoring her ever since. So there we go. In the end, opposite-sex friendships never bring any good. I wanted to believe that guys and girls could just be friends, but clearly they can't. I've given this a lot of thought, and decided to tell Lily everything, as she deserves to know what a cruel and conniving guy Todd is. I don't know how she'll react, but I know I have to let her know, right? I hope she gives me another chance, but it might be too late. Todd tore us apart with his mind games, and I stood by and let him. Geez, I miss her. Wish me luck.
I was born into a pretty poor family, so money was always on my mind. As I grew up, all I wanted was to have money, and I couldn't wait until I was old enough to start making some of my own. I especially couldn't stand the way people took advantage of others just to get some quick cash. And yet, it wasn't long before I almost became like one of those gold diggers that I hated so much. I'm Jolie, and I'm 20 years old. You might be wondering why I hate gold diggers. Well, who doesn't? But for starters, my mom was one. Yup, that's right. She ditched me and my dad to marry some rich guy when I was just 5 years old. I can't even recall her face, but I still remember that day like it was just yesterday. I was screaming and crying and begging her not to leave, but she didn't even look back. Ever since, it's just been me and my dad. Obviously, my dad worked really hard to make enough money to raise me alone, but we were still poor. He worked on construction sites, and the hours were long, so it wasn't long before his health started to go downhill. A lot of his money went towards medical bills, and so we made do with whatever was left. This made me hate my mom so much. She was the most selfish person in the world to me. Dad still encouraged me to focus on my education, though, so I ended up going to college to further study Chinese, which I've always been fond for. But after 1 year, we couldn't afford it anymore, so I decided to quit and find a job to help my dad out. At first, I worked as a waitress, but I was pretty smart, and my Chinese was good. So eventually, I got another job as an interpreter in a big company, where I met John. He was the CEO, and also the person who would change my entire life. So there I was working 2 jobs, and even though I was exhausted, I was happy. I was making enough money to look after my dad, and also had enough left to buy gifts for my boyfriend. Yep, that's right. I had a boyfriend called Scott, and we'd been dating for 2 years. I felt like the luckiest girl in the world, because he was drop-dead gorgeous. I loved buying him stuff, because it made him so happy. Finally, my life was turning around for the better. But then everything changed in the blink of an eye. I caught Scott cheating on me with some woman the same age as his mom. I couldn't believe it. He used his good looks to date older women, just so he could get their money. He was as bad as my mom. Nothing but a gold digger. Though, little did I know, I was about to follow in their footsteps. It all started the day I caught him cheating. I was so upset and miserable. I'd bumped into them in the mall where I'd seen them holding hands and kissing, and all I wanted was to get as far away as possible from there. I ran out onto the street, and then I just collapsed onto the sidewalk. and started crying my eyes out. Suddenly, I heard someone say, "Jolie, what are you doing here?" I looked up, and John, the CEO, was standing there. I tried to stop the tears, but I couldn't. I couldn't even speak. He helped me up and told me to get in the car and go somewhere so I could calm myself down. Then we ended up in a bar, and I drank a lot. I couldn't stop myself from telling him about what Scott had done. John comforted me, and then, the next moment, I woke up, and John was lying next to me. I was about to freak out, but John looked at me and smiled, and said that if I hung out with him from time to time, like this, then he'd subsidize everything for me, so that I could go back to college and pay my tuition. I was shocked. He said it had to be our secret, so that his wife didn't find out. I was about to say no way, but the thought of being able to finish my studies and graduate made me consider it again. And after all, John was being so sweet, and me and my dad could really use that extra money. So the next moment, I found myself nodding my head, and the rest was history. I had officially become John's secret lover, aka a gold digger. And let me tell you, my life got so much easier. I went back to college and had more time to enjoy life. But at the same time, I couldn't shake off the guilt, especially when I thought about John's wife. I'd never met her before, but I knew from working at John's company that her name was Doris, and that she was the perfect wife. I even found out that they didn't have kids because Doris was infertile after some accident. This made me feel so bad. How had I let myself become a mistress like this? It wasn't right. But still, I couldn't just end things with John. You see, I'd actually started to fall in love with him. Yes, you can say I was a gold digger, but I also had real feelings for him. And so did he. He took care of me, and I was happy with him. It was only natural that I'd start loving him. And so, even though I knew what we were doing was wrong, I couldn't stop it. Then one day, I was walking to the bus stop when a random man approached me and said that Doris wanted to meet me. Oh my God, Doris knew about me? I felt so sick suddenly. He said she wanted to meet me right away, and so I followed him to a nearby cafe where she was waiting. As soon as I saw her, my jaw dropped. I knew her. It was the woman Scott had cheated on me with. No way! I couldn't believe my eyes. When she saw me, she looked shocked. But then she said, "Well, well, well. Looks like we're destined to meet. Okay, I'll get straight to the point. You need to back away from my husband." What? Clearly, Doris wasn't the perfect wife everyone made her out to be. I said to her, "You do know you're no better than me, right? I wonder what John would say if he knew you were having an affair too." She was furious. She started shouting at me, saying John would never leave her, and that she would not let me steal him away, especially his money, and that it all belonged to her. Then she stormed off. Surprise, surprise, she was just with John for his money. She was even worse than me. At least I loved him. After that meeting, the war between Doris and I officially began. She started to rub in my face that she was his wife, and I wasn't. Every day, she'd turn up at the office with his lunch and kiss him in front of me. Honestly, it made me sick. No, really, like literally sick. But no luck for her, the universe works in funny ways. And guess what? I was pregnant. And this was one thing I could give John that Doris couldn't. I was so happy. I called John right away. He was over the moon and promised to take care of me and the kid. He started spending more time with me after that. But one day when we were together, Doris called and said she was sick. I couldn't stand her interrupting our special time like this, so I pretended to have stomach pains, and he immediately drove me to the hospital and asked their maid to go take care of Doris. Ha! I'd won this time. But then something shocking happened. Doris appeared in front of my house. When would she give up? I walked towards her and asked, "What else do you want now?" She was about to say something, but suddenly, my dad came out from the house and said, "Jolie, What are you doing?" So both me and Doris turned back and, well, that's when things got crazier. "Doris?" My dad shouted in surprise. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. Then Doris said, "Thomas?" How did they know each other? Well, the next thing, my dad was screaming, "Get away from her! She's not your daughter anymore!" I froze. Doris was my mom? Before I could even say anything, she ran to her car and drove off. I didn't even want to see my dad. I just wanted to be alone. That night, I lay awake all night thinking about it all. I'd been competing with my mom? This was so wrong. What was I going to do? I loved John, and I wanted to have his baby so badly, but he was my mom's husband. And then, all those old feelings of abandonment came flooding back. My mom had left us, and now she was hurting John. She just took advantage of our love and only cared about money. She didn't care about any of us. Why could she be so selfish? I couldn't stop crying. Everything was such a mess. Eventually, I fell asleep, and when I woke up, I knew what I had to do. Even though she was my mom, she needed to learn a lesson once and for all. I called John and asked if we could meet at our favorite cafe. I was so nervous, but I told him everything. How she'd cheated on him, and then how she was my mom. I even showed him some photos of her with Scott that I'd taken outside Scott's house. John was so shocked. He just stared at me, not saying anything. He looked completely heartbroken, and I wanted to hug and comfort him, but I knew I couldn't do that anymore. In the end, John divorced Doris and kicked her out of the house, leaving her with nothing. And then, you won't believe it, he proposed to me. What did I say? Well, I'm still deciding. Becoming the wife of my mom's ex-husband just feels a bit strange. My mom has suffered a lot already. I'm not sure I want to make her even more miserable. But let's see. All I know is that I'm going to give birth soon and raise this baby in the best way I can. I'm definitely going to be a better mom than my mom was. That's for sure.
Hi guys, I'm Austin, and I'm a 23-year-old college student. I guess my school years went by pretty smoothly, as I had my best friend Jake by my side. When we're not partying and living large, me and him would work part-time at this local restaurant. The pay was pretty dismal, but it funded some fun nights out at least. My story starts as many do, with a cute girl. And I'm talking Ariana Grande pretty. Me and Jake first spotted her one day in the coffee shop that we always dropped by on our way to work. Neither of us could quit staring at her. She must have noticed us too, as instead of leaving, she turned back, smiled in our direction, then walked over to the counter and ordered another drink to go. She was obviously doing this because she wanted to talk to me, so I rushed over there to start a convo. The problem was Jake tagged along too, and offered to pay for her drink. Ugh. She seemed flattered, smiled, then thanked us both. Then I was about to ask her for her number, but she rushed off as she said, "Gotta go, my Uber's here." It was such a bummer. All I knew about her was that she was the hottest girl ever, and her name was Darcy. Well, that was the name written on her takeout cup. Feeling a bit deflated, me and Jake walked back to our table. But as we passed the table she'd been sitting at, we saw a phone. I presumed it was hers, and she left it there, so I lunged for it before Jake could. He looked so annoyed. Ha! Now the chance to see her again is mine. The phone was locked, but I was sure she'd call any minute now. I wanted to wait for her to come back and look for it, but I had to get to work. I kept the phone in the pocket of my apron throughout my shift, just in case she called, and also so Jake wouldn't get his hands on it and try and steal my girl. During our break time, I sat down with Jake and we looked at the phone for a bit. Yeah, I know it was locked, so there wasn't much to see. However, even on the lock screen, we could see there was a picture of a brunette girl. Why would she have another girl as her wallpaper, though? Could this be her girlfriend or something? Nah, I seriously needed to quit overthinking. I'd seen the way she smiled at me. She totally liked me. This probably was just an old picture of her when she had brown hair. Finally, as I was finishing my shift, the phone rang. I cleared my throat, then in my sexiest voice answered with a, "Hey there." Only to my surprise, she started screaming at me, calling me a thief. I tried explaining that she'd got it all wrong, and I'd meet her at the coffee shop to settle things down. She sounded so cranky, and not at all like the mild-mannered girl from earlier. Then again, I would have acted crazy too if I lost my phone. After the shift, me and Jake walked back to the coffee shop, and as we approached the place, I pulled out my phone and called the number earlier to ask where she was waiting. But then I saw a big guy pick up his phone instead. I was terrified, so I shoved Darcy's phone to Jake and told him to go return it. He didn't know anything and excitedly grabbed it and ran over, only to be stopped by that guy in front of the coffee shop. He asked, "Aren't you the one who stole my phone?" Jake was puzzled and looked at me for help, and we just mumbled out that it wasn't, that it was some pretty girl's phone. She left it behind, so we thought we would find some way to give it back to her. Then the man said, "No, it's not any pretty girl's phone. Don't be sly. We've looked at the CCTV and saw what you did. It was a mess. So are you telling me that we couldn't see our dream girl again, but be caught up in this stealing chaos instead? This sucks." Things got even worse when this big guy put Jake in a headlock. Luckily, a woman walked toward him and said, "It's okay, Tim. We can talk this out." Well, he wasn't wrong anyway. I am a pretty girl. I'll take care of it from here. Then she gestured to him to go wait in the car and leave us three alone. She told us her name was Chelsea, and that the scary-looking guy was her younger brother. She gave us a chance to explain what happened. Then she told us what was shown on the surveillance cameras. In the end, we realized what actually happened. While we'd been talking to Darcy at the counter, Chelsea and her brother must have come in and sat at the table Darcy had been at. Then they quickly changed their minds and switched tables, but Chelsea left her phone there by mistake. Once this Chelsea girl realized it was all a misunderstanding, she kept on twirling her hair around her finger, and I'm sure I saw her wink at me. Was she flirting with us? I mean, she was kinda cute, but she's surely older than us, like around 30-ish. Then she said, "So how about we go hang out sometime? As I see it, you owe me a coffee at least." Was she being serious? I couldn't go on a date with her. I don't feel comfortable dating someone that much older than me. And what about Darcy? She's all I had in mind right now. I mean, I could always go and tell my brother that you guys really stole my phone, she smirked. Was she joking or being serious? I didn't know, and I wasn't going to chance it. So I spluttered out, "Sure, coffee will be good." We exchanged phone numbers with her. Later, she texted us to set up the times and places. I didn't want to meet her, so on the day of the date, I phoned Jake up and feigned being sick, and told him he'd have to go alone. To my surprise, he didn't seem to mind. Instead, he sounded excited about it. Then, after the date, he came straight to my dorm, saying he wanted to check up on me, but I knew it's just an excuse. All he did was go on and on with me about how much fun Chelsea was, and that she was rich and stuff, so it wasn't just a simple coffee date. But she took him to this fancy restaurant too. I didn't expect Jake would be like that. I'm glad he enjoyed it though. Anything so I wouldn't have to go on a date with her. This went on for a while, and soon they seemed pretty serious. Whenever Jake spoke about her, he went all gooey eyes. So my boy was in love. She clearly cared about him too, and made it so he didn't have to work at the restaurant anymore. I was happy for Jake. I truly was. And also relieved I didn't have to date Chelsea. But I also felt down about it all. He was in love while my dream girl was out there somewhere, and I didn't know how to find her. And that's when my luck changed. I was at work carrying the drinks over to a table when, to my surprise, I saw that Darcy was sitting there. I must have been gawping at her as she laughed and said, "Hey, the Coke's mine." Blushing, I passed her the Coke, then said, "I don't know if you remember, but we met a few weeks ago in the coffee shop around the corner." "Sure," she smiled. "It's nice to meet you again, coffee boy." She was so cute and sweet. There's no way I could let her slip through my fingers again. So I checked to make sure my boss wasn't looking. Then I asked Darcy for her number. She wrote it on a napkin and passed it to me on her way out. I was so excited I fist-pumped the air. Through our messages, I discovered she'd just started an internship around the corner, and she really wanted to impress them so they'd offer her an official job. I was happy as this meant I would get to see her loads. Every time she came into the restaurant, I tried my best to make a move with her without letting my boss notice. One time, I gave her a free dessert, then said, "Something sweet for the sweetest girl I know." Cheesy, I know, but girls love that kind of stuff. There were sparks flying everywhere. I knew she felt it too. I just needed to find the courage to ask her out. Then one day, suddenly Chelsea texted me, asking why I never came to see her. I thought this was odd, so I replied that I thought her and Jake were kind of official now. To my surprise, she replied, "Come on, you still haven't properly made it up to me after stealing my phone. You know the cops wouldn't be too happy to hear that either, right? Or I could just tell my brother." I didn't want to get in trouble with either her giant of a brother or the cops, so yeah, I agreed to go on a date with her. We met at the same coffee shop where this whole phone drama started, as she said it was close to her work. This time, she introduced herself as the marketing manager of some big company. Wow, okay, that's impressive for her age. She's beautiful and successful. Maybe I really have been a bit rude to this respectable woman, so I decided to sit back and hear her out. But the next minute, she was like, "Austin, I've loved you since first sight." She grabbed my hand. "Jake's a sweet guy, but he's not you." What? She didn't even know me. She was crazy. And how could she do this to Jake? Then suddenly a group of people walked into the cafe. She said they were her employees and waved them over, then told them, "Everyone, this is my boyfriend Austin." I glared at her, but I had no choice but to awkwardly greet everyone just to get it over with as quick as possible. But then I saw a familiar face in the crowd. No way. Hey, it's Austin here again. So I met this hot girl called Darcy that I really like, and I think she really likes me too. But then a phone mix-up meant I had to date this cougar called Chelsea, who was also dating my friend Jake. I know, awkward. Things got even worse when Chelsea introduced me to her employees as her boyfriend. But then I saw Darcy standing there. Oh no. The girl I like works for Chelsea? This was bad. Really bad. Darcy looked so disappointed. Man, this sucked. For the rest of the date, I kept turning around to check on her. I even tried sending her a text to assure her it wasn't what it looked like. But this was tricky to do when Chelsea wouldn't take her eyes off of me. Do you know her? Darcy? You keep looking at her. So, is there something between you guys? I just shrugged and said, "Nah, she comes into the restaurant sometimes, that's all." She must have seen right through my words, as she smirked then said, "Is that so? Well, then you won't mind me firing her. Unless, of course, you continue to date me, but don't tell Jake or anyone about it. Deal?" Turns out Chelsea was even crazier than I thought. She was playing me and I didn't like it, not one bit. But I couldn't stand by and let Darcy lose her job because of me. I knew how much it meant to her. "Fine," I replied, "but no kissing or anything like that." She grinned back. "Whatever, you'll fall for my charm soon enough." As if. She was deluded, like I'd ever want to kiss someone who treated me like prey. Anyway, I only had to put up with this until Darcy finished her internship, then signed her contract. Later on, I texted Darcy explaining that Chelsea was just a friend and nothing more, but she didn't seem convinced. From then on, whenever she came into the restaurant, she barely met my eye, even when I gave her an extra slice of dessert. Ouch. Worse still, I kept on bumping into Darcy when I was on dates with Chelsea. Whether it was the coffee shop, walking the street, or going into a restaurant, she always seemed to be there to spot us. And Chelsea didn't help at all as she kept on clinging on to me and acted up when she noticed Darcy was around. Dating Chelsea was hard work. She just wouldn't quit pestering me. It felt like every time I wasn't working, she dragged me out to some posh restaurant or the theater or something. Yawn. When was she going to get the hint that I didn't have feelings for her? I hoped she'd figured it out soon enough, as things were getting awkward between me and Jake. I hated having to lie to him. Then he messaged me saying he was feeling really down, as he was pretty sure Chelsea was seeing some other dude. Aw man, why was I stuck in this mess? I messaged him back telling him she was probably just busy with work, and not to panic. Now all I needed to do was convince Chelsea to be a one-man woman, and choose Jake. On our next date, Chelsea took me to this expensive Italian, and oh my God, the food was so good. But even that didn't make up for how tedious the date was. She just sat there staring at me like she wanted to eat me or something. It made me feel so uncomfortable. Later that night, I was at home watching a movie and wondering how I could end things with Chelsea when I heard an angry thud at my door. I opened it, and to my surprise, it was Jake. He yelled out, "I thought you didn't care about Chelsea. Guess you've seen me being well treated and now you want that too? Step aside." I tried telling him I didn't want her, but this only made him madder. What, so you don't want her, just her money? How can you do that to Chelsea? She's beautiful and smart and, Jake, she made me. If I don't do this, then she's going to fire Darcy. Oh, and set her brother on us both. She's got me on a string, bro. I had no choice. I sighed and looked away to avoid his eyes. Jake's face fell as he took in this news. Then he muttered out, "Oh well, I guess I knew what she was like." I felt bad for him, but what did he expect? Of course, she was only playing with him. And even he himself knew that he only had himself to blame for falling for her act. He said, "Right, whatever. She needs to learn a lesson at least. We can't just let her get off with this that easily. Anyway, she could only do harm to Darcy during this internship period, right? Yep, and not anymore when Darcy signs the contract in a month. Okay then, let's play some pranks on Chelsea. We'll let her experience one glorious month of a cheater." I was kinda excited about messing with Chelsea. She certainly deserved it for ruining my chances with Darcy. Let the fun begin. So Jake asked her to go on dates when he knew she was on dates with me. Then when she made up excuses, he rang her up and sobbed out how she never wanted to spend time with him anymore. Then another time when I was on a date with her, I went to the bathroom. Then Jake stormed into the restaurant and demanded to know what she was doing there. He made sure he left before I got back, but it was so funny walking over to the table and seeing her look all flustered. The problem was that as fun as these pranks on her were, they didn't change the fact I still had to date her. Then she told me I had to escort her to the swanky event dinner her company was having. The only exciting parts of the night were eating the food and, of course, seeing Darcy. Wow, nothing could prepare me for how stunning she looked. Unfortunately, Chelsea's brother Tim had noticed this too, and he kept on creeping around her. I saw him offer her drinks and put his arm around her. I wanted to go and drag her away from him so badly, but I had my own problems, as Chelsea led me from group to group and introduced me to them all as her boyfriend. Ugh. Finally, when Chelsea was in the bathroom, I managed to go over to Darcy. Only Tim was with her. He was kinda tipsy and was slurring out his words as he asked her to hang out with him and his friends after the event. Poor Darcy. She looked so uncomfortable. So I said, "Hey Darcy, Chelsea wants to talk to you. It sounds pretty urgent. She's waiting for you outside." I led the way. Then when we stepped outside and it was just the two of us, I said, "Sorry it took me so long to save you from that creep. Are you okay?" She couldn't even look me in the eye as she replied, "I could look after myself." Then she went to walk back inside, so I pulled her back and said, "Please, Darcy, wait. It's time I told you everything." So I told her all about the mishap with the phone on our first meeting in the coffee shop, how Chelsea forced me and Jake to date her, then how she was threatening to fire Darcy if I didn't go on dates with her. At first, Darcy rolled her eyes and muttered, "Yeah, right." But after I mentioned the part about her job, she seemed to believe me. She let out a long sigh. "Chelsea does talk about you all the time. Now I know why." Then she said I didn't need to do this for her anymore, as she didn't intend on staying at the company anyway. It was too toxic of an environment for her, and her colleagues treated her so badly just because she was a pretty newbie. Then she said the main reason why she didn't quit the internship was because of me. Every time she came to my restaurant, I would cheer her up and make her feel much better. Okay, so this counted as her confessing her feelings for me, right? Give me 1 week to do what I need to do. Then I'm leaving that awful place, she told me. That sounds doable. I smiled at her. I hugged her, then we went back inside as if nothing happened. The following week was so exciting. I couldn't wait till I could finally be with Darcy. I told Jake all about it, and he decided to play one last joke on Chelsea. And there's no way I was missing this one. So I hid around the corner and watched as he turned up her doorstep and told her he couldn't be with her anymore because he couldn't stop thinking about her brother Tim. The shock on her face was Priceless. Then she started yelling at him that she didn't want him to contact her ever again and to stay away from her brother. We had such a laugh. Jake's my best friend, and I really do wish him all the best only. Hopefully now that Chelsea's out of his life, he can move on. And finally, Darcy quit her job, and now I can do what I first intended to do, before this phone and crazy woman mess got in the way, and that's to take the prettiest girl I've ever seen in my life on a date. It was just such a long and messy journey to get here, but good things take time, right?
Sometimes in life, we have a chance encounter with someone who ends up changing our life. This is exactly what happened to me, and it was totally unexpected. You see, I was pretty lonely at the time. I'm Amelia, by the way, and I'm 20 years old. I was living all on my own in a tiny house in Portland. It was my mom's house, but she sadly passed away from cancer 2 years ago. I'm not going to say that life was easy for me, because it wasn't. All I wanted was to become a comic book artist. I love art so much, but the only way I could make this dream a reality was to make money. Ever since graduating from high school, I'd been working as a waitress to make ends meet, and also to save up enough cash to enroll in art college. Honestly, this job got me through the hardest time in my life. The days, weeks, and months after my mom passed away were so painful, and the restaurant kept me busy, so I barely had time to sit with all my feelings. Moreover, little did I know how much this waitressing job would change my life forever. It all started with an incident in the restaurant. I'll never forget that day. I was carrying a tray of food when I accidentally spilled some water onto the shoes of some fancy girl. Oh my god, she went crazy. She started screaming at me, and even though I frantically apologized right away, she still asked to speak to my manager. I leapt down and tried to clean the water off her shoes with a cloth, and that's when I heard a voice.
Hey, stop! What do you think you're doing?
I looked up and saw the boy she was with staring at me. He looked disgusted at me, and then said to the girl,
Babe, let's bounce before that waitress ruins your shoes even more with her filthy hands. Come on, let's hit the mall. I'll buy you a new pair of shoes.
Clearly, he was her boyfriend, and as soon as he mentioned new shoes, her eyes sparkled with joy as she said, Yay, babe! I want a new bag too, though. Could you?
And her boyfriend just laughed and said, Anything you want, my princess.
They got up to leave and smirked at me as they walked away. I couldn't believe how rude they were, especially the boy. I felt so angry, I wished I could slap him right across that cocky face. But of course, I didn't. There was no way I could risk losing my job, but I knew that if I ever saw his face again, I'd definitely give him a piece of my mind. And, well, believe it or not, I did indeed see him again. The world works in mysterious ways, and I guess we were destined to meet again. A few weeks after that, one evening, I was heading home and passed by the park to feed the stray cats as usual. While I was playing with them, I noticed some guy heading towards me. Suddenly, he grabbed my arms and pulled me towards him. I started shouting at him and trying to push him away, but he was too strong. Then, out of nowhere, someone said,
What's going on? I'm trying to sleep over here. Keep it down.
A drunk, dirty-looking homeless guy walked towards us, and for a second I was terrified. But then I realized he was helping me. He started shouting at the guy holding on to me, saying,
Hey you! Are you deaf or something? Let her go and keep silent.
The jerk was getting heated, and the next moment, he punched that homeless guy in the face, and then they started fighting. Then I freaked out and didn't know what to do. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and played a recording of a police siren. I live alone, so I know all the tricks. Well, that did it. The jerk who'd grabbed me suddenly jumped up and sprinted out of the park. The homeless guy who'd helped me was still lying on the ground, so I helped him up. He was black and blue, and there were even some scratches on his face, and as I got closer to him, I realized he looked familiar. OMG! Wasn't he the rude guy from the restaurant? What was he doing looking all dirty like a homeless guy? He had his eyes closed, so I patted his face and said, "Hey, wake up! What are you doing out here?" He opened his eyes and asked,
"Do I know you?"
He stared at me for a while, then eyeing my uniform and smiled.
"Oh, the little waitress. Guess what? I'm poorer than you now."
Then he passed out. I was so annoyed that I'd bumped into him again. I was about to leave him lying there, but then I realized he'd saved me, and I could hardly leave him there with all his injuries. So, yeah, in the end, I decided to take him back to my place to get my first aid kit. I cleaned up his scratches, and then let him crash on my sofa. The next morning, he was super surprised when he woke up. I told him what had happened and that he'd saved my life, so I saved his. Then I said he should probably head home now, but he just stared at me. And that's when he told me his story. He really was homeless. His parents had kicked him out because they'd found out he wasn't their biological son. What on earth? How could any parent do that? It's not like he has tricked them, but it was due to some mix-up at birth. So, wasn't he also a victim? I felt sorry for him, but still, it was none of my business. I had to get to work, so I asked him to leave, but he begged me to let him stay. I just looked at him in shock and said, how about you go to your rich girlfriend's place instead? I really need to get going now. But he didn't budge. He said,
"Oh, don't even mention that gold digger. She only cared about me when I was the only son of a millionaire. Now that I've got nothing, not a cent, she broke up with me."
Wow, shocker. But, well, it's not like I couldn't tell that she has a lousy personality right from the get-go. So I said, "Well, what about your friends? Can't you crash with them?" But he said no. It started to frustrate me. So I said, "You can't stay here. I don't even know a thing about you." Then he splurted out,
"Hi, I'm Jude. I'm 22 years old, I've got all my fingers and toes, and my criminal record is clean. There you go. Now you know me."
And he topped it off with a grin, as if that could win me over. He then went on to say that he'd pay rent, and that when he found a job and stuff, he'd leave. I hesitated. I mean, I couldn't live with a strange guy. But then I thought about that extra money I'd get if he helped with rent. I could really use that money for my college fees. He could see I wasn't sure, so he said,
"Come on, please. I mean, I did save your life last night."
"But there's only one bedroom," I said.
"Don't worry, I'll sleep here."
He pointed at the sofa. I thought for a while, then nodded my head and agreed. "And only for 1 month, okay?" Then I made him shower and change his clothes, since he was so gross and dirty. But he told me he didn't have anything to change to.
"I was kicked out, remember?"
And he even had the cheek to ask me for some money to buy new clothes. No chance. I told him he could wear my clothes, since some of them were quite big. At first, he refused. He said there was no way he was wearing women's clothes. So I said he either wore them or kept his dirty clothes and left my house. Ha! Of course he had no choice. And seeing him in my floral pants was hilarious. A few days later, though, he still hadn't found a job. Every night I'd come home to find him lying on the sofa in my oversized pajamas. He was so messy and lazy, and after a week, I couldn't bear it. I nagged him. "You have to find a job, or how do you expect to pay me rent? And the least you can do is clean up around here. I'm not your maid." He said he'd been looking for an office job, but it was hard as he had no knowledge and experience. This annoyed me, so I suggested he apply for a delivery man position. He looked at me in horror and said,
"What do you think I am?"
"Oh, hello, you're a homeless boy with nothing. What else do you want?" I thought. Then I said he could come work with me in the restaurant, but he refused, saying that his friends went there all the time and they'd laugh at him. I was speechless. I said, "Suit yourself, but after 1 month, you're out of here." A few hours later, he knocked on my bedroom door and said he'd take the restaurant job. but he needed clothes. Finally, I'm glad that this boy has come to his senses. That's great. You can start from tomorrow. I'll call the manager. And I know the exact place where you could get all the stylish clothes for free. Let's go. At first, he was so excited. But when he realized that I was taking him to a clothing donation center, his face changed. He looked disgusted and said, "No way." I smirked and said, "It's up to you. You either pick something to wear from this place, or you can wear my clothes. I've got a floral dress that would really bring out the color of your eyes." He looked so sulky as he reluctantly went through the rack of used clothes. It was so funny. But everything was only about to start. You won't believe what happened next. Stay tuned for part 2 to see how things went between Jude and I.
Hey guys, I'm Vanessa, and I want to tell you about my first love. So, do you all remember your first love? Yes, right? I mean, come on. How could you ever forget that first time butterflies in the tummy feeling, hand holding, and that kiss? In the heat of first love, it's easy to believe this will last forever and be a true fairy tale. Only so many first loves lead to a messy breakups that turn into a nightmare. My first love was with a boy named Julian, but you'll have to stick around to find out if our love story was a fairy tale dream or a fairy tale doom. Julian and I started off as friends, best friends. He lived across the street from me and our families were close. We hung out all the time, so much so that our parents teased that we'd get married one day. At the time I thought, no way, but we were just kids back then. Then, when I was about 10, I started to look at him differently. He was so cute and sweet, and I thought about him all the time. He liked me too, right? I mean, he bought me my favorite candy, let me play video games with him, and stuck up for me when these boys from school teased me. And then when I was 15, Julian and I were at our favorite spot. It was a really big old tree in the middle of the park. We went there loads and would lean against the tree trunk, do our homework, listen to music with one headphone, read books, basically anything relaxing. That's when he told me the shocking news. His dad had a new job in Germany, and they were moving there. What? How could this be? I was so surprised. I started crying. I expected him to comfort me, but instead he took out a pocket knife and started to carve on the tree. When he finished, he said, "Ta-da! How does it look?" He'd carved J Heart V in it. Oh gosh, he loved me too. I felt myself turn bright red and didn't want him to see me like that. So looking downward, I went to punch his arm but punched his face by mistake. Oops. Julian held his face and yelled, "Vanessa, what was that for?" I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Julian, I feel the same, I told him. We both started laughing, then we pinky promised each other that we would keep in touch. He took my hand and told me, "Ness, I'll come back for you, I promise." Then he leaned in and kissed me. And wow, it was truly magical. And then he left. The first few weeks without him were the hardest. I didn't really have any other friends, and I was so bored and lonely. I lived for my video calls with Julian. They were the only thing keeping me going. Telling him stuff that happened at school, such as how my math teacher wore the same hideous floral dress all week, made me feel like he was still there. Things went on like that for a while. It slowly became a habit for us to have a video chat at least twice a week. But then a couple of days after my 16th birthday, things changed. It was a normal Sunday morning and I woke up and went to wash my face. Ah! There were red spots all over my cheeks. I screamed so loudly that I woke everybody up. Even my neighbors had to run over and ask what the scream was about. My parents took me to the hospital and I was diagnosed with a disease called lupus. For all of you who don't know what it is, it's a skin disease that causes rashes or sores. In my case, it was all over my cheeks, the same as what my grandma had. Worst of all, there was no cure. The doctors could only improve the way my skin looked, prevent scarring, and help me feel better overall. This couldn't be happening. Why me? When we got home, I ran right upstairs to my room and stared into the mirror. I'd gone from pretty to ugly in the space of a day. It wasn't fair. And then suddenly my phone rang. It was Julian. Oh no, in all the drama, I'd forgotten about our planned video call. I couldn't let him see me like this. I was so exhausted with all this lupus stuff that I couldn't think of a solution. So I just turned my phone off. I texted him the next day that I was busy so I couldn't FaceTime with him. This carried on for weeks. I just couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. Then he texted me saying that he got the message loud and clear, that I didn't want to be his friend anymore. I texted him back telling him this wasn't the case and I'd just been super busy. But the damage was done. He stopped calling me after that and even unfriended me on Facebook. And that was it. I lost my best friend and also my first love, all because I couldn't cope with my new appearance. Little by little, I was shutting myself off and pushing everyone around me away. I just didn't want anyone to see me like this. Instead, I wanted to hide away from the world. Each day, I'd watch my classmates hang out together and I'd walk off by myself and go to my favorite tree, lean against the trunk, close my eyes, listen to some sad songs, and remember all the good times I had with Julian. This was basically part of my daily routine during the whole 4 years of high school. School finished and I moved away to college. Things got better. I made a few friends who accepted me for the way I looked and slowly I started to accept it too. There was this one tree on campus. It looked just like the one back at home, so I went there all the time. One day I was sitting there reading a book when this guy in a baseball cap started measuring the ground. Then, without looking at me, he said, "Excuse me, can you please move?" I was confused, so I asked, sure, but why? The guy replied,
"Oh, the college is going to build a new cafeteria here, so we have to chop down this tree."
What? They wanted to chop down my favorite spot on campus just so that they could build some stupid cafeteria? No way! Who was this guy anyway? And didn't anyone ever tell him it was rude not to look people in the eyes when talking to them? I gave him a piece of my mind. You architects are all the same. You never give a damn about what you have to destroy to build an ugly building. Leave this tree alone or I'll chop you down. Then I gave him a really dirty look. He just shrugged and carried on measuring. This made me so mad that I kicked him in the butt, causing him to fall onto the ground. His cap fell off and whoa, it couldn't be. Julian? Was that really him? But how? Wasn't he in Germany? Why was he here? And why didn't he recognize me? I mean, I had a different haircut and all, but I didn't think I've changed that much. Or was it because of my lupus? Suddenly, I heard him say,
"What the? Are you mad? What's wrong with you?"
Oh gosh, I'd totally forgotten that he was still lying on the ground. I mumbled out sorry, and immediately rushed back to my dorm. That night, I couldn't sleep. Instead, all I could think about was Julian. He was so handsome and so tall. How could he have become so good looking? Why did this stupid disease pick me? There was my first love right in front of me after all those years apart. But because of my disease, he didn't know who I was. He blossomed and I hadn't. Maybe it was for the better that Julian didn't recognize me. If he knew this was how I look like now, oh boy, I didn't even want to imagine how embarrassed I would be. So, okay, let's just put it aside for now. What I first needed to do was save my tree. There's no way I was letting the college chop it down. I did some research and found out that the construction would begin in a week. So, I had time to convince as many students as I could to protest against it. And when the day came, I had about 20 people with me. We all held signs and said, "Save the tree" and "Stop the chop." The head of campus, Julian, and the construction workers were trying to make us leave, but we were persistent. At the end, they had to push back the construction dates. One of us remained by the tree at all times, come rain or shine. It was exhausting and cold, but it was worth it when the tree was saved. Then, one day when I was on tree guarding duty, my friend rushed over to me and excitedly told me that the college was going to change the location of the new building. That was such great news. Apparently, Julian had told them that the ground was more suitable in another location. Why would he help us all of a sudden? Did he have a change of mind? I went to class with those questions that kept bugging my mind. And right after school was out, I came over to the tree again, and to my surprise, I saw Julian standing next to it. I walked towards him and asked, "Why did you convince them to change the location of the building? I mean, we really appreciate it, but why the change of heart?" Julian froze for a second and then said, "Hey, it's Vanessa, back with the final part of my story. So, my first love Julian moved to Germany, and due to my insecurities, we lost touch. Then, years later, I saw him at my college campus, measuring my favorite tree to be chopped down. He didn't recognize me, but thanks to him, the tree was saved. He said to me,
"This tree must mean a lot to you, or else you wouldn't have fought so hard to save it. I had a tree like this once," he sighed. "Please continue to protect it."
I felt a pain in my heart. I knew he meant our tree back home. This was all so overwhelming. There I was looking at my first love, but he was oblivious to who I was. And I couldn't tell him because I was terrified that doing so would mean I'd lose him all over again. After that, I didn't see him around campus anymore. Was he living here now? Was he in another city? There were so many questions I wanted to ask him. Then my mom called and told me to come home for the weekend. I arrived there to find her setting out food in the kitchen. On seeing me, she said, "Oh, honey, I have a surprise for you. Julian and his family are back in town, and they're coming over for lunch." What? Oh, no. Why hadn't she told me sooner? I started to panic. What was I going to do now? I rushed to my room and tried to find anything I could use to cover my face. Finally, I found one thing. I heard my mom opening the door for Julian and his family. Then my mom cheerfully shouted, "Vanessa, where are you, sweetie? Come down. Julian is here, and oh my, he's so handsome." But my parents' smile soon disappeared as soon as they saw me coming down the stairs. They literally stood there with their mouths wide open. My mother stuttered, "Vanessa, what in God's name are you wearing?" Yeah, so the only thing I could find to cover my face was a face mask. Worse still, it had a smiling dog face on it. I know I look ridiculous, but at least my lupus was covered. Thinking fast, I muttered, I have a cold and I don't want anyone to catch it." Then I turned and saw Julian and my heart fluttered. He gave me a confused look. He clearly didn't know how to take my accessory. This was so awkward. The last memory he had of me was that I didn't want to video call with him anymore. And that was 5 years ago. Ugh, this sucked. I nodded at him and he nodded back. I caught him looking at me, no doubt because I was wearing that dumb mask. But we didn't actually speak to each other. Luckily, our parents were carrying the conversation. But then, my mom suggested that we should all go out for dinner tomorrow night. Mom, not again! Why didn't she realize that I needed to be pre-warned about these things? Then again, it was so easy for her as she had perfect-looking skin. Luckily, Julian's family were busy tomorrow. Phew! But they suggested having dinner the day after that. Ugh! Dinner was unavoidable, so I had to figure out a way of disguising my face. So, the evening of the dinner, I ran downstairs and my mom glared at me. "Vanessa, what on earth are you wearing? You look like Elton John." So yeah, I was wearing these huge fashion sunglasses. They were the only ones I could find online that I knew would arrive in time. I replied, "This is the new trend now. You're just too old to understand." At the restaurant, Julian and his family gave me the weirdest looks, but I acted like everything was normal and mentioned how good the food was. To be honest, I felt so awkward and just hoped this meal would be over soon. It all got a bit too much, so I went outside to get some fresh air. That's when Julian appeared. At first, he just stood there next to me in silence. It got to a point where I couldn't take it anymore, so I said, "Since when did you come back here?" He replied,
"Since 1 month.
Feeling annoyed, I replied, "Why didn't you call me?"
Ness, you're the one who didn't want to be friends anymore."
"Oh no, you got it all wrong. I had some problems, girl problems. I couldn't tell you."
"You know, I was really lonely in Germany. You were the only friend I had."
His voice sagged. I replied, I know, it was stupid of me. I'm sorry, but you're back now. Can we be friends again? He looked at me for a bit, then smiled and said,
Seriously, how can I be mad at you now? I mean, look at you.
And then we hugged. I finally had my best friend back, but this wasn't enough for me. Seeing him again made me realize I still loved him even after all these years. My face was the problem. I was convinced that on seeing the real me, he'd run for the hills. After that, Julian and I texted each other loads, but then he asked me out on a date. At first, I was super excited, but then the reality of this dawned on me. I put on my prettiest dress, but as I stood in front of the mirror, all I saw were my bright red cheeks. Maybe I should just risk it. Maybe he would understand and still love me? I mean, it was inner beauty that counted, right? But no, I couldn't do it. So I messaged him back saying that I couldn't go out with him, but he was persistent. In the end, I ran out of excuses, so eventually I had to agree. Okay, so now what? I couldn't keep on wearing face masks and sunglasses. Then I had an idea. What about makeup? I knew it would make my skin worse, but this was an emergency. I put some makeup on, but the rashes were still visible, so I put more and more and more and I resembled Billy the Puppet from the Saw movies. Then there was a knock at the door. Oh no, he was here already! Oh well, I hope he likes horror movies. On seeing me, Julian looked kinda shocked, but he tried to act normal. The restaurant we went to was so nice, but every time he looked at me, he had to try his hardest not to laugh, which in turn made me want to laugh too. Awkward. Afterward, we went for a walk through the park when it suddenly began to rain. So we hurried over to our favorite big tree to take cover. Julian found the carving on the tree and said,
Do you remember this? That day I promised you I'd come back for you.
Then he turned to me, pulled me towards him. His face came closer and oh my God, was he going to kiss me? But then he stopped and said,
Oh Ness, your makeup is floating away. I have a tissue. Let me clean your face.
Wait, what? Oh no, not now. I panicked. I didn't know what to do, so I hid my face from Julian and said, Don't look at me. Can you please go? Confused, he asked,
What? You're acting really weird. What's wrong?
Then he turned to look at my face. I pushed him away and said, No, I'm fine. I'm just having a girl problem moment. But Julian kept insisting, so I freaked out and ran into the rain. He ran behind me yelling,
Vanessa, stop!
I kept running, but then I tripped and my face fell into a muddy puddle. Oh, great! My whole face was covered with mud and my knee was bleeding, so I couldn't stand up. Julian had to help me hobble to the nearest drugstore to buy some bandages and some betadine to clean the wound for me. I sat on a bench feeling like a wounded puppy when he took out a tissue and started wiping the mud from my face. At first, I stopped him, but then he gave me a really serious look, so I let him clean my face. Well, that was it. Julian would finally see my face and he would definitely not want to date me anymore. While cleaning my face, he looked surprised. Then he said,
Wait a minute, you're going to college in Florida, right? Didn't I meet you like a few weeks ago on the campus? Why didn't you tell me it was you?
Because I didn't want you to see me like this. I turned my head away. He looked confused, so he asked,
Like what exactly? Ness, you're acting so weird.
What did he mean? Was he trying to make fun of me? So I shouted in anger, It's my face! Don't act like you don't see it. I was afraid that if you saw my face, you wouldn't want to be with me anymore. Julian shook his head and said,
No, Ness, why would I ever do that? To me, you will always be beautiful. Beauty isn't only about having a pretty face. It's about having a pretty mind, a pretty heart, and a pretty soul.
And then he kissed me on the forehead. Oh gosh, I never imagined that it would turn out like this. Julian was indeed the sweetest person ever, and I should have never have doubted him. Well, Julian and I became an official couple. Loving him makes me so happy. He makes me believe in myself and reminds me that regardless of my lupus, I'm still beautiful. And we will soon get married in a few months. I can't wait to spend the rest of my life with him, happily ever after. So, as you can see, in the end, Julian was my first and my last love, which means my fairy tale dreams did come true. But let me tell you this, it's not important if you marry your first love or not. It's important that you marry someone who makes you happy. and someone who accepts you for who you are. So, when you find someone like that, then hold on to them, whether this is your first or your 21st love.
Hey, it's Haley again. So, as amazing as being famous is, it also comes with some problems. The first one being Eric. Having a famous ex around is awkward. Secondly, it's all the unknowns that being in the public eye brought with it. For instance, I was currently backstage at my first mini show, terrified, because I was pretty sure someone just took a picture of me in an unzipped dress. I worriedly looked at Dean. Did you see who that was? Why would someone take those kind of pictures? Oh no, what if they sell them to the press? Dean gave me a reassuring look and said,
Don't worry. I promise I'll definitely find out who did it. Now, please relax, as your performance is in any minute, and you wouldn't want to let this affect it, right?
Then I watched him leave. What he said made sense. This was an important show for me and Phil, so I couldn't mess things up. When I was on the stage, I pushed all my worries to the side and concentrated on what I did best, singing my heart out. Afterward, we hung around and had a little fan meeting. It was crazy being around people that knew my name and wanted selfies with me. Phil was getting plenty of attention too. It seemed he was a hit with the fangirls. I heard them saying how handsome they thought he was, and so cool. Phil may have kept a straight face, but I knew he liked it really. I mean, come on, who wouldn't? Then, someone even shouted that Phil and I made a beautiful couple. Phil almost burst out laughing, and I just smiled shyly. Then one girl asked me if I had any plans besides singing. I didn't know how to answer, as I'd never thought about doing anything besides singing before.
You should be a vlogger, one girl suggested. Or you could be in movies,
another said. Oh, that didn't sound too bad. Thinking about it, trying something new alongside my singing might help promote our music and increase my popularity. It was definitely something to consider, thanks to my awesome fans. Then, as luck would have it, I found out that a famous director was holding auditions for a supporting role in his project. It was a perfect chance for beginners like me to learn from these veteran actors. Besides, it wouldn't take much time, so I could still have time for music. So I immediately signed up to participate. The day of the casting arrived, and I was excited, but also really worried. The last time I'd attended an audition was during my freshman year of swing club. Wow, time sure does fly. I was sitting in the waiting room when I saw a familiar face sitting in the corner. It was Eric. He must have been trying out for a part too. Suddenly, our eyes met, but I immediately avoided his gaze. My heart began to skip a beat, and it wasn't due to nerves. It was down to seeing him. Even after all this time, he still had that effect on me. Sigh. Before I could decide whether I should go and say hi to him or not, a very hot guy walked over to me. I recognized him from a few hit movies and knew he was a big deal. He smiled at me and said,
Are you Haley? As in, the singer.
I nodded back, awestruck that this super famous guy knew who I was. He sat down next to me and asked me if I was worried about my audition. I told him I was a bit, so he started telling me about some of his previous auditions and experiences. At first, it was great hearing this stuff from a pro, but then he asked me if I wanted to hang out with him on the weekend. I started to feel a bit uncomfortable because of his flirty behaviors, but I didn't know how to politely say no. I tried to avoid his eyes while thinking of an excuse, and suddenly I thought of Eric, so I glanced over in his direction, but he'd gone. Meanwhile, that actor guy started to move closer to me, wrapped his arm around my shoulder, and stroked my hair. I kind of started to panic. Then suddenly, I felt someone grabbing my hand and pulling me away. Turns out, it was Eric. What was he doing? Eric pulled me to the balcony at the end of the hallway. I glared at him. What was that for? I'm not yours to drag to places whenever you want. He replied,
I don't like you chatting with other guys, especially not slimeballs like him.
I felt my heart beating faster, but I tried to keep my cool as I replied, You have no say in who I can and can't talk to. We're not even friends. Eric looked at me with sad eyes.
I'm so sorry, Haley. I don't want it to be like this. Please forgive me. I miss you.
This was so typical of Eric, winding me up before my audition. So I growled out, Sorry is no use to me. You have no idea how much you hurt me. Unexpectedly, he replied,
I will break up with Clara. Well, no. The truth is, there was nothing between me and Clara in the first place.
Ha! That sounds familiar. You must have said the same thing to Clara to be with her while you were still dating me, right? I said, then started to walk off. He replied with a low voice.
Everything was forced by the company.
I stopped on the spot and looked at him, then angrily said, Oh, you think I'll trust you again? I'm no longer the innocent girl who believes everything you say. After a moment of silence, he sighed, then told me everything. When he rose to fame and was working with Clara, she was always openly showing affection for him, even though Eric has told her to stop many times, and once she even confessed her feelings towards him. He rejected her immediately, as he was with me and didn't like her in that way. I rolled my eyes and said, Yeah, right. If you really rejected her feelings right away, then things wouldn't be this way. Eric cut off my words.
Please just listen to me first.
Then he continued.
Clara didn't take the rejection well, so she posted our photo on Instagram and spread rumors with the press that we were dating. At the time, I was furious and wanted to correct the press, but Will stopped me. He even said that our dating rumors were getting a very good response from our fans, so he told me to go along with it.
I looked straight at him and said, Okay, so there's nothing between the two of you, but you still chose to listen to the company and leave me without any explanation, right? He said,
I'm so sorry, but they promised me that it'd only be until the duet with Clara was released. Besides, they even offered to help you become famous once it's done. That's why I endured it all. I did it for you.
Whoa, this whole thing was unbelievable. I didn't expect that company to be that bad, but thank God that it turned out there was really nothing between Eric and Clara, just as I suspected. So I said, You didn't have to do that. I can stand up on my own. Then Eric smiled at me and held my hand.
Yep, I shouldn't worry so much, since my girl here is so talented. Haley, I messed up, but I did it with good intentions. Can you forgive me?
My feelings were really chaotic, surprised, happy, and guilty at the same time. As confusing as it all was, I knew that I still loved Eric. So with teary eyes, I nodded. Then he pulled me into his arms. Suddenly, I remembered one thing. I asked him, what about the bouquets? You sent me those purple peonies, right? He shyly nodded.
Yes, they were from me, so you'd know I was thinking about you.
I squeezed him tight and whispered a thank you. I couldn't believe all this, as if I just got a huge weight off my shoulders now that everything has been resolved. After that, I did my audition. I'm not sure how well it went, as my mind was elsewhere. Afterward, Eric drove me to a secluded part of the beach, and we held hands and went for a walk on the sand. I felt so happy to see the old Eric again, the real him, the one I'd fallen in love with. So, you see, Eric and I got back together. But of course, we kept it a secret from the public. Only our close friends knew about it. I told Anna and Kurt over video call, and Anna cheered, but Kurt was a bit more skeptical and told me to be careful, as once a snake, always a snake. But I didn't think much about it, as me and Eric were in our own euphoria. Everything seemed to be going well. too well. And then something terrible happened. One day, I was having a slump while trying to compose my first song at home, so I surfed the internet for a bit, hoping to find some inspiration. Then suddenly, I saw my name trending on Twitter, so I quickly clicked on one article. The article said that I was a rude and disrespectful girl. What? They even confirmed that the news was revealed by a veteran actor in the showbiz world, but no name was given. Could it have been that actor guy from the audition? Surely, the fact that Eric suddenly pulled me away had irritated him, but he turned out to be not much of a decent guy either. And the problem is that in Hollywood, rumors have a way of sticking. As a result, a few of my advertising contracts were canceled, and so were some of our gigs. One teen magazine even called the office to tell us that they wouldn't publish my interview anymore, as I was a bad influence on their young readers. It was so embarrassing. I was struggling, but our company too had a hard time dealing with this scandal. I felt guilty, as it could affect the entire company's image, but both Dean and Phil reassured me that it would pass, and that malicious rumors came with the fame. I tried to stay strong and believe it would blow over, but then my anti-fan base grew. There were forums and hate clubs all about me. You know, even if you read 1,000 compliments, that one negative comment is the only thing that's left on your mind. I tried not to read them, but they were everywhere, saying horrible stuff about my singing, my outfits, and the way I look. One afternoon, I was lying in bed thinking, when suddenly I heard the doorbell. I feared that it was one of the anti-fans who'd come to throw paint on me or something. I peeked through the peephole and saw Eric standing there with a big hat and sunglasses. OMG! What was he doing here? I quickly opened the door and nervously looked around, then hissed at him. Eric, what are you doing here? Someone might spot you. He replied,
Haley, you're the most important person in my life. I'd trade it all for you.
His kind words made me so happy. That day, Eric cooked me a delicious meal. Then he taught me how to deal with haters and ignore the comments. I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world. But unfortunately, everything didn't stop there. Hey, it's Haley here again. So, as you've known, Anna has told the whole world the truth about Eric and me. Now, everyone knew that he chose fame over me, and then played with my heart. A lot was going on, and I was so confused. So after a heavy night, I went for a walk to clear my head. And who should I see sleeping in front of Daystar Records but Eric? Even though Eric had just broken my heart again, I couldn't bear seeing him like this. So when he asked to have a talk with me, I softly said, "Let's get you out of here first." I helped Eric walk to the nearby park, and we sat on a bench hidden away in the corner to avoid people's eyes. Eric was still half asleep with his head between his hands, so I went to grab us some coffees. I bought him a cup of latte. How pathetic! After all the pain that he gave me, I still remembered every little fact about him, such as this one, about how he hated black coffee. So I couldn't help but let out a bitter smile thinking about it. I sat down next to Eric, handed him the coffee, and said, "Here, drink it. Then you'll be sober enough to say whatever you feel you need to." Eric took the coffee, but he started talking in a rush, as if he feared I was going to just leave.
Haley, I'm so sorry. I've been so foolish living under the control of others. Well, I should have protected you.
I didn't expect him to start off like that right away. I didn't know what to say. Eric seemed to notice my silence, so he forced a laugh to erase the tense atmosphere and carried on.
How did I even get here while being so wasted? Perhaps it's because my head is always full of you. Haley, I know nothing I do could ever make it all up for you anymore. I don't know what to do. I've run out of energy to live like this. I just want to go back to being a normal, happy teenager who just simply loves music.
Okay, this was strange, as I'd never seen Eric like this before. It's like his whole world had just collapsed at his feet. He has been defeated. I couldn't keep up my cold facade anymore, so in a soft voice I replied, "Eric, you're a strong man. You can get through this and make it right." He looked a bit brighter as he saw me talking to him again, so I continued. "I know we viewed LA as this promised dreamland, but maybe the reality of it is different. It's ruthless out here, but I can honestly say that singing and making music with Phil during this past year has been the happiest time of my life. Eric, I don't know if you share the same feelings, but it seems like LA has turned you into someone you're not and erased the flame in your eyes." Eric looked sad as he sighed out,
Maybe it has.
Whoa, his words surprised me. What happened to the optimistic boy who believed nothing was impossible? The one who always picked me up every time I was lost and upset? That's when I realized he needed my help more than ever in this moment. So I put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Remember that music is our happy place, not our burden. When things are at their hardest for me, I turn to music. So we should never let other things ruin this pure passion of ours. Let's just put aside all the dramas and whatever's between us. I truly hope you will soon find the real you again. Make it worth it, Eric, because I don't think your 16-year-old self would have wanted you to end up like this." I could tell that my words had hit home. He sat up straight and looked far away with determination in his eyes. I'd said all I needed to say, so I gave him an encouraging smile and bid him goodbye before leaving. "Take care, Eric. I hope to read good news about you soon." That conversation to me was a good closure for our relationship. It's officially over now, no matter what the truth was. I didn't want to be bothered anymore. I've made my decision. Life must go on, and I'd rather put my heart and soul into my music. But then, news of Eric came sooner than I expected, and I'm not sure if it was good or bad. I was having dinner alone at home and channel hopping when I came across an entertainment news on TV that was talking about Eric. The anchor delivered the news that was just in that Eric wanted to terminate the contract with his company. There was even a rumor that during a meeting, he punched his manager, Will. Not only that, but Eric also accused his company of interfering in his private life and forcing him to fake a relationship with Clara. I was so shocked that I dropped my bowl of salad. If he dared to let this out in public, then it must have been the truth, right? Whoa, exposing his company like this was an extremely risky move, as they were a powerful force. Now what would he do? A few days later, Eric showed up at Daystar Records. I thought he was there to see me, but he said he needed to talk to Phil and wanted me to hear it too. I was confused. What did Eric have to say to Phil? And why did he want me to be a part of it? Eric looked exhausted, and I could see the dark circles under his eyes. He seemed hesitant, as if he didn't know where to begin. Finally, he started telling Phil and me that he wanted to terminate the contract with his company, but he needed Phil's help. Turns out, when Eric let his company know about his decision, they threatened him that if he left them, they would destroy his career path, and every song he had performed would belong to them. It meant that Eric would have to start again at the very beginning to continue following his passion for music. Wow, I knew those people were ruthless, but this was cruel. Still, I was confused as to why Eric was seeking out Phil's help. But then Eric turned to Phil and said,
"I was hoping that you'd be able to help, seeing as you composed some of my songs."
What? Phil had written songs for Eric? No one had ever told me about this. Eric continued,
"Plus, with your family's influence on the industry, my company probably won't be able to abuse their power anymore. Look, what I'm trying to say is, I know I've messed up, and I've been a jerk to you, but the truth is, I respect everything you and your family have done for the music industry. So, I've come to you as a fellow musician, asking if you can help me get copyright for those songs."
I sat there open-mouthed. Turns out, Phil is the musician who composed some of Eric's hit songs under his stage name. In fact, Phil comes from a family that has a strong position in this industry. His mom is a famous singer, and his dad is a well-known producer. But he never mentioned it because he wanted to earn recognition from people on his own merits. I already knew that Phil also composed music for other artists, but I had no idea that he'd written some of Eric's hit songs. What a mysterious genius! With reluctance, Phil replied,
Eric, I'm sorry, but it's out of my hands, as the copyright of all those songs belonged to the record label the moment I signed the contract.
Eric couldn't hide his sad look, as he thanked Phil and said that he would figure another way out. But then he turned to me and asked if we could talk. I led him into the room next door. Eric sat down next to me and buried his head in his hands.
I'm so sorry, Haley. I've been a coward. Fame turned me into someone I don't want to be, and now I'm trying to put it right. I was so concerned with my career that I'd agreed to Will's ludicrous demands.
He looked at me with sad eyes, then continued.
I naively believed him when he said I only needed to pretend to date Clara for a short time. A week turned into another week, then a month, and there's no excuse for how I treated you. I lost true love for fake fame, and I will be forever regretful of this.
As I listened to Eric, I didn't feel angry toward him anymore. Instead, I sympathized with him. Will manipulated him. He was nothing but a puppet for him to control as he saw fit. But there was one thing I couldn't figure out, so I asked Eric, after the party and the incident with Dean's wife Jane, why did you just vanish like that? He took my hand and said,
Clara was jealous, so she hired people to stalk you, and one of them took that photo of you and Dean. Then Clara showed it to Jane to cause a fuss. I knew she was behind it, so I confronted her. Only, she seemed proud of her actions. She told me if I didn't cut all contact with you, she'd share that picture on the internet, and she'd make it her mission to turn the world against you.
Sighing, I said, Eric, you should have been honest with me. He said,
I know. I'm sorry, Haley. It wasn't just Clara. It was Will, too. He told me that he would do anything in his power to destroy your career if I continued to see you. Besides, I thought you'd be better off without me. All I've done is caused you pain, and unintentionally damage your career, when all I ever set out to do was protect you.
I was touched, but angry at Eric at the same time by what he told me. I had no clue that Eric had to bear all those pressures alone, just to protect me. He had even been hitted by Kurt. I choked, trying to speak up. Idiot! They can start whatever ridiculous rumors they like about me, but they can never threaten my career. But Eric forced a smile.
I know. You're an unstoppable force. I'm glad you finally know the whole truth. I hope one day you can find a way to forgive me.
It felt good to have cleared the air, but so much had happened between us, and I wasn't ready to move on from that. So I hugged him, wished him the best, and told him that I needed time. The most important thing for Eric right now was to escape from his evil company's control, and I wanted to help him do this if I could. Will was a big name in the industry, and he had a lot of powerful connections, so leaving wouldn't be easy for Eric, as Will would go out of his way to make sure that no other companies would work with him again. Eric and I parted on good terms, and I wished him all the best. Now, it was time for me to focus on myself. Well, that was the plan. But then about a week after that, I was on my way to an event I was performing at, and scrolling through my phone when I saw there was breaking news regarding Eric.